Half after the hour now, let's turn our attention to World Intellectual Property Day. And we're joined this morning by Design and Corporate Communications in Debbie Estwick and Tamar Grant, who is the Deputy Registrar with the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property. Good morning, ladies.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Welcome. Today, World Intellectual Property Day. And for a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises, this is a way to really make a big difference in their revenues. Let's talk about what is intellectual property. Who's going to take that question?
Intellectual property refers to creations of the mind, such as inventions, literary and artistic work, designs, and symbols. Intellectual property can be categorized in various sections, and I do believe that most Barbadians are familiar with copyright, which applies to books and other literary works, movies, and music. And the other type of intellectual property, which most Barbadians should be familiar with, is trademarks, which relates to logos that you see on almost every product in and the signs outside of businesses.
So we're talking here about trademarks, inventions, authorship, trade secrets and a whole range of things like that. And then someone who operates a very small and medium enterprise in Barbados thinks, well, that's not me. Why should you dissuade them from thinking that way? Tell me.
Well, first, let me highlight that for this year celebration of IP Day, the theme is intellectual property and small and medium-sized enterprises taking your ideas to market. So the very theme captures the idea that small and medium-sized enterprises can benefit from intellectual property as it relates to their growth, development, and even with respect to exporting to markets beyond Barbados. For small and medium-sized businesses, sometimes you may think, well, IP doesn't apply to me, but that would be very wrong, because if you have a say you have a logo for your business, you would want to protect that as a trademark. If you are a business dealing with the sale of food and beverages, you may want to protect your recipe. There's some businesses that protect their 11 herbs and spices. So you may want to protect your special recipe for your sauce or your cookies or your cake, whichever it is that you make. As well as for music producers, if you're going to be pushing your music internationally, and during this pandemic, we've seen a lot of virtual platforms being utilized as a way to engage with music and entertainment, then you would want to ensure that your music.
When people operate their small home-based activities, they're thinking, I don't have the time for all of that. And you're suggesting today they ought to have the time for all of that. But it requires sitting down for just a moment and identifying who owns that intellectual property. That could be very, very time consuming. So how are you going to reach out to that community to assist them in being able to sort all of that confusion out?
Well, one place that you can start for more information about intellectual property, if you're unsure as to whether or not you do have intellectual property, is that you can refer to the website caipo.gov.bb, sorry, caipo.gov.bb, caipo.gov.bb. That is the website, which is run by the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office. And on that website, there's a link which covers intellectual property. And there you can see all of the various types of intellectual property which our office deals with. And of course, we always suggest that anyone who's unsure, you can seek the services of an attorney at law to assist you in that regard. And there are many organizations in government. You can reach out to the Ministry of Small Business and Entrepreneurship, where they would be able to assist you or point you in the direction that you may need to go as it relates to that. So there are lots of options.
Debbie, let's talk to you, Debbie Estwick now, who is the Design Corporate Communications. How do you see your role making that big difference in helping those SMEs really, feel comfortable with the world that's broadening now called IP?
Yes, so IP becomes really critical to small businesses. What we like to say at BIDC is that IP is for everyone and everyone can export. We think of the small business, a person who may be very good at making juice or making pepper sauce, making seasoning, something like that. And IP becomes critical when they're looking to export. Some of the areas that they may look into, and we would want to educate them about some of these areas so that people can see themselves exporting, would be protecting their name or their brand so that people can recognize them and know who they are. They can pick them over and over again in the export market. It goes even beyond that when we start to talk about packaging and labeling. Persons can protect their patterns. Something like that would be important. We can all think of something like the Louis Vuitton print, which is so recognizable, or an Hermes scarf and the print on that. It's the same thing for our local businesses who may be looking to get their products into an export market and for it to be recognizable. And then IP opens up a number of opportunities when we think about production. A person could protect, for example, their formula, the formula that they use for their pepper sauce. And then they would also be able to think about, well, maybe I can have this bottled overseas, produced and bottled overseas. My formula is protected. And then I can have it printed, packaged, all of that done in the export market, and they haven't left Barbados. So there are many opportunities, whether they're looking to ship it physically from Barbados or they're looking to have it produced abroad. There's so many opportunities that protecting their intellectual property opens to them.
And when we talk about intellectual property, so that everybody understands, because we love to throw in some words, and sometimes you sit there, you said, not for me, that's somebody else. We're talking about the almost like the sweat and tears that you put into your mind, and that from that mind you created something, and that something is now your intellectual property. It is yours. And so you want to be able to leverage that to bring some tangible benefit to you as well. So if you're thinking that you've added a special ingredient to your pepper sauce and it has a different kick to it, and you know for sure that when you looked around no one else has that, then that's your intellectual property. Am I right so far?
Yes, you are. I want to use the example out of Jamaica, where they have protected the geographical indicator. That's another form of intellectual property for their jerk seasoning. So when you go to buy a bottle of jerk seasoning, understand that Jamaican jerk seasoning is protected. Also, the same thing goes for Blue Mountain coffee, which originates from Jamaica. When you look at the packaging, when you look at the labeling, that is a sign that this particular product is protected by intellectual property law.
So what are we losing out on? Because we take it so for granted, that nobody else is probably doing this. And so what if they are? And we say that to ourselves, I don't have the time to get all fussy in that kind of way. So what are we potentially losing out on?
Well,
So I might
Go ahead,
go
Debbie.
ahead, Debbie.
Oh,
Go
thank
ahead.
you. Thanks. I might suggest that you're losing now and you're potentially losing later. So if you're not protecting yourself now, it means that someone else can come along and they can protect that special thing that you thought you created. They can do it first. You can stop yourself in that way from being able to progress, because if they protect it first, you're going to lose out later. When they have protected it, you can't have it anymore. If they decide to come after you and say, no, this is mine, it's not yours anymore. And even though you may have gotten there first, you had the idea, you created the thing, you came up with the formula. If you do not protect it, you can lose it.
So true. Sometimes you go online, you're trying to set up your website, and you figure, but my name is Pearson Bowen. How is it that somebody already owns that domain? And that's the basic idea that you're talking about, where if you don't get in there first and someone else does, you lose it because you were snoozing.
Yes,
and it's to guard against that. But it's also important to guard against infringement. And I want to talk a little bit quickly about that as well, because sometimes we figure it's all right and it's not all right.
no. when it comes to infringement of intellectual property, what you must know first and foremost is that you will not be able to fight against infringement if your product, if your item, your idea is not registered and is not protected. So that is the first thing. We do have intellectual property laws which speak to the way in which you can challenge infringements, both here as well as overseas. But the first step is to have your intellectual property registered and protected.
If I don't know that it is intellectual property, and I want to take that word, those two words out of the atmosphere for a second, and really make it practical, because nobody's going to pick
Okay.
up the phone and think, hey, do I have intellectual property? They're going to pick up the phone and come to you and say, listen, I'm just creating this thing. Could you guide me? So to you, Debbie, when those within your organization at BIDC do something, is there a place where they can now begin to get guidance and trying to understand what it is they're doing and what they ought to begin to protect?
Yes, there definitely is. We've focused at BIDC. We've repositioned ourselves so that we can focus on being Export Barbados, where we help our clients design it, make it, ship it. To the point of infringement that we were talking about, at that design it phase, we're making sure that what is being designed is really original because everybody has ideas, but everybody hasn't necessarily created something out of it. So, for example, just to bring it home to the business, if you saw a video on YouTube and you like the design of whatever product they were making and you take that and you decide to make it and export it, then you have a problem. It's not your intellectual property. It belongs to
Mhm.
somebody else. Where you saw that video or you saw that product, that design may already be protected. So you would not be able to take that design, carry it overseas, and try to sell it back to the same community that originated it.
Yes.
So that's just a really practical way to look at it. But at the IDC, we can help you design it, make it, and export it or ship it.
And from your end, Tamar, can
Yeah.
individuals, owners of small and medium-sized enterprises, call KIPO and begin that discussion about how we can begin to determine what is my own intellectual property or where I may have infringed on somebody else's?
Yes. If you reach out to KIPO, you would be able to get information on the various types of intellectual property that are there. You may also be able to get some assistance as it relates to just identifying whether or not you do have a type of intellectual property that could be protected. But as I indicated, we do have a website where you can pick up some of those details as well, caipo.gov.bb. And additionally, while yesterday is World Intellectual Property Day, we also have for the next week a series of activities going
Mm-hmm.
so that those persons who are interested in learning more about IP can make use of those activities to find out. And we've recognized that during this COVID-19 pandemic, we're seeing an increase in the number of businesses related to the food and beverage industry as persons try to find a way to manage. And so on the 30th of April, this Friday, we have a webinar, a free webinar, which is being put on to assist persons in understanding what IP is and what they need to know about IP as it relates to their particular small and medium-sized business. And that's under the title of your IP shopping list.
Mm-hmm.
It
That's this
will
Friday.
our feed yes, this Friday.
You were saying,
For Oh, thank you. Additionally, we'll also be having a session for persons involved in the import and distribution sector here in Barbados. Now, this is not generally open to the public. It is being put on by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade in conjunction with Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property, as well as the Ministry of Energy, Small Business and Entrepreneurship. And this is geared towards persons in the import and distribution sector as it relates to geographical indicators. It's a very special workshop being put on tomorrow. So for those of you who know you're in that particular sector, you may want to check your emails to ensure that you have your invitation and kindly respond to that invitation so you don't miss out. And our final event will be on the 3rd of May, which will be looking at music as it relates to the virtual airways.
You see
For
that?
all of
That's
the information in relation to that, you can check our website. And yeah,
caipo.gov.bb. Gotta leave it there.
yeah.
Tamar Grant, who is the Deputy Registrar for the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property here in Barbados, and Debbie Estwick, who is Design and Corporate Communications with the BIDC. Thank you so much, ladies, and best of luck, really, on today being World Intellectual Property Day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
You're very welcome. Tamar just touched on something that we're going to touch on a little